situation could be changed, right? The brain can do all kinds of things. It's so amazing that it is not static. But it takes the power of those around us and in community to together make a difference. So what I want to say is within that integration of the left and the right, we are meant to flourish. And that's what I hope my art speaks to, the fact that also as we collaborate, we can flourish as well. So that's all. Thanks.
Do we have any questions for Janine?
Yes. Thank you. She's my model.
This is a question for you about this whole journey. When you look back on it, what's been the most surprising thing to you?
Ending up somewhere like here. Really? I had no interest in science. Really. I mean, I've always been interested in nature. From an artistic point of view, I do have a curiosity about things in general. But I've also been pleasantly surprised by being welcomed into these spaces. I think there's a misunderstanding that scientific events are quite, they can be perceived as quite intimidating. And I will say, when I first stepped into those, the first question I was asked is like, where'd you get your PhD? And I was like, I don't have one. I'm an artist. I'm here, out of the joy of hoping to meet and mingle with you and learn from you. So I've been pleasantly surprised by that. So thank you.
Well, thank you again so much for sharing your art with us. We're going to take just a 5-minute break to reset for the art and culture. If you are a speaker in the art and culture session, please come down to the front. Otherwise, please come back in 5 minutes. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, there it is. Yes. Are you the first speaker? Yes. Yes, I checked it all. You know, like there's microscopes. It's like my, it's like, no, whatever you mean. Okay, so welcome to the Arts and Culture talk session. We're going to start with a talk from Aime Aguilar-Herrera on integrating technology and tradition to investigate creativity in a longitudinal study of Balinese performing arts. Thank you.
Hello everyone. It's a pleasure for me to present this project. As they mentioned, I'm presenting integrating technology and tradition to investigate creativity in a longitudinal study of Balinese performing arts. This project is a collaboration between Rice University, Udayana University, Institute of Fine Arts at Indonesia, and the University of Houston. So most of the creative studies has been done with Western centric perspective, especially Western centered art forms like ballet, jazz, classical music. But they doesn't really go. It's a limited exploration of how culture can influence the mechanisms of creativity. Also, most of these studies are made in laboratory settings that may not capture the complexity of creative process in natural environments. So we are studying the Balinese performing arts because it requires a precise synchronization between dancers and musicians, offering a unique opportunity to study sensory motor integration, coordination in real time, performance settings, and also these kind of art usually it's performed in communal and spiritual practices. So it also gives us a window on social dynamics. So the gamelan music has interlocking rhythms and dynamic tempo changes. Also, the Balinese dance has a dynamic, angular, and expressive movements incorporating intricate gestures of fingers, hand, head, and eyes to convey stories and emotions. So we packed our lab and we went to Indonesia for 4 weeks in a longitudinal study to track the creative process from initial rehearsals to the final performance. So we studied different performing diets, including drummer-singer, drummer-drummer, dancer-dancer, and we acquired data from the head motion, the brain activity with EEG 28 electrodes, also the eye movement with EOG, and video audiovisual data. So for the public that was attending to this performance, we also created live data projections. We did a real-time denoising. We calculate the interbrain synchrony between the performers, and we connect this to a generative AI platform so we can see the brain acting, but controlling Balinese elements. So this is a small sample of what we saw in the final performance. There in the front, you can see the two musicians that we instrumented and also the dancer. Thank you. So bringing the lab to this real world environment and with these traditional practices is a challenge, especially because we don't want to miss the real world part of it. So we wanted to integrate our equipment and be as less invasive as possible. So we needed to work around it, and not only that, but also trying to co-create knowledge, honoring with these communities that we have the privilege to work with. Some of the preliminary results that I can show you are that there were some activations during the performance that was the visual motor coordination, visual association, working memory, attention, and executive function. But there's a really big challenge here that it's trying to capture the full human experience also requires a lot of data. So we're talking about 4 weeks every day training, 3 hours a day. That it's like normal for an artist, but in data that it's equivalent to having tons of data that takes time to analyze. But there's a really big reward after all of this, integrating technology and adapting technology into these practices with empathy. It really creates a human-centered science and also renews the interest into traditional practices. And we hope to inspire how including these arts into the neuroscience can bring a new vision and broad an inclusive model that neuroscience can be.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for one question. Maybe? No? Well, thank you so much for sharing. That was really, really beautiful to watch. So next, I'm delighted to introduce someone whose work I've been following for years. Dwaynica Greaves is one of the few neuroscientists that studies something very close to my heart, which is live theater. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to jump straight into it. So I'm interested in the sense of self as one of the big topics in my PhD. And just simplified, this is the ability to have an experience of yourself that's different from a living organism or object. And I'm taking the neuroscientist approach because my PhD is in cognitive neuroscience, and in the literature, predominantly in fMRI, we can see that in the medial prefrontal cortex, there's a strong response to hearing your own name. So why am I interested in actors? Aside from the fact that I genuinely like theater, that's what I liked when I was like a child growing up. So the actors have a self, we all have a self, but then the actor goes through a process and they learn techniques in how to develop this character's self. And that relationship between the two is what I'm really interested in, and how to actually measure that empirically. Oh, wait. Sorry, I'm just moving my little cursor. So yes, I actually spoke about this in 2022 online for the conference that you guys had, but the paper wasn't published at the time. So hopefully that works and you can scan it and read the paper. But the main questions we had was, initially it was a proof of principle. We just wanted to know, will it work? You know, if we take brain imaging, a live theater performance or a live rehearsal and put it all together, you know, can we actually measure and investigate social cognition? And then secondly, obviously we need to build it on something. So we built it on the sense of self. So can we find that your own name is stronger than your stranger name, or a different name, should I say, than when you're comparing acting conditions to non-acting conditions? And that's because the literature before obviously showed that. So we just want to find like the basic name call effect, if you want to call it that. So as I said, you may have heard this before, so I'm going quickly through this section so I can move on to my new work. But the actors were in pairs and they were rehearsing, and they either were acting or they were speaking and walking, and the speaking and walking are the control conditions, and they heard their own name or a fellow actor's name. In this situation, the other actor wasn't a stranger because they were all part of the same theater company. So yeah. And we use functional near-infrared spectroscopy, and that uses near-infrared light to basically shine with the sources into the brain, into the tissue, and then the light is detected, and the oxygenation of the blood in that tissue will determine how much light is basically detected. And from there, we can have inferences about brain activity. So we did that for the entire prefrontal cortex, even though we were obviously really interested in the medial prefrontal cortex. And this is a picture of one of the actors in like all of the gear. I mean, we looked at a lot of things, interpersonal coordination as well in the paper, but I'm only speaking about the ethnos and sense of self element. So what do we find? So we basically found in the left frontal polar cortex and the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex that own name was stronger compared to other name when you're not acting, which is great. This is what we wanted to find. But then you may ask, okay, what happened to the MPFC? Well, yeah, it was really difficult to get good data from these channels. So we basically went back to the drawing board, and that's what I've spent the last, I guess, 4 years doing in my PhD, is trying to build this paradigm and obviously do a lot of other things too, but I'll just speak about this. So firstly, we decided I'm not going to do hyperscanning, predominantly because like I'm not really interested in interpersonal coordination anymore. So I thought, let me focus on the sense of self. And then we also tried to change how the actors were moving around. So instead of moving around and jumping around the place, because they were really doing that in the other study, we had them seated and doing a monologue, which is almost like a self-tape, so not so far from ecological validity. And we included character name and stranger name, because that was the one thing that bugged me. I was like, oh, like they hear their name, their fellow actors' names, but there's no character name in it. So we added that to the paradigm, and then stranger name as well, so someone that you genuinely don't know. And then because we changed the acting task, we also had to change the control task as well to match that. So the coloring book, which was coloring in a mandala coloring book in silence, and then a telephone book, which was reading names and numbers from UK department stores out loud, were the other two control conditions that we had. And the actors heard their own name, character name, and stranger name twice during each of these blocks. Oh yeah, it's small for me, but you can see that. Okay, so the first research question, now we know that the frontal polar cortex is a self-other region, and it was very prominent in our other data set, so we added it in here. So taking both of these areas into consideration, how active are these self-processing regions in general? And then can we find that own name is stronger than stranger name in the control conditions as well? And then can we find that character name is stronger than own name in the active condition? And if you find number 2, then number 3 can be a bit valid. So let's see what we actually found. I've actually presented this data quite a lot over the past couple of years, but this is the first time I'm presenting it post FDR correction. So everything I've said before, if any of you have heard it, just scrap it. It's not too far from it, but we didn't find anything in the MPFC again, but I'll speak about that in my discussion. However, the frontal polar cortex really just came through for us this time again. So the first research question, we actually found that the monologue had higher activation in the left frontal polar cortex compared to the control conditions combined, and then more significantly with the coloring book condition, where you'd think it's a telephone book, but this is the data straight out of MATLAB. So, you know, take it out with MATLAB or my code as to why it looks like that. Secondly, can we find that O name is greater than stranger name in the control conditions? And O name was, so that's great. You know, we found that consistently in the previous data set as well. However, for the last research question, we didn't find anything, which is a shame, but it's okay. Moving on to the right frontal polar cortex. So again, with the research questions, we didn't find anything for the first research question. But then with that O name, stranger name effect, we found that again in the coloring book. So that's nice, consistent. However, this time when you move to the telephone book, we actually see that O name was suppressed. I don't know why. So that's what I'll be thinking about as I write my thesis. And then once again, we didn't find anything for the final research question. So what are my conclusions? I mean, they're more takeaway because I don't really want to conclude anything like, you know, so strong, but it is possible to build better neuroscience experiments / paradigms. The MPFC is actually quite hard to measure with FNERS. I say using our paradigm just in case somebody else has managed to do it. So I'm not going to say overall, but with fMRI, it's probably much easier because it is quite deep in the cortex. So yeah, it was either too noisy or literally post FDR, like the MPFC significant results just vanished. But the frontal polar cortex came in, as I said, and we really was able to find that effect. And then actors are more responsive to their own name when they're not acting compared to another actor's name from the first experiment and a stranger's name from the second experiment. However, we don't want to forget the suppression that happened in the telephone book condition in the right frontal polar cortex for the second experiment. Actors' frontal polar cortex are most active when they're performing a fair to base self-other task to obviously be very specific to what it was that we did in that experiment. So yeah, thank you all for listening, and thank you to those who are part of the team as well.
The question I have is, I wondered if in these professional actors, their character name is almost akin to their own name, and that you're just not seeing a difference between those two conditions. Whereas if you found, if it was a, you know, an amateur or non-professional actor, maybe you would. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think so. And with our actors, they had to be 2+ years of professional experience outside of drama school as well. So I feel like, for me, as I said, right now I'm in a place where I need to look through everything and really think about what my conclusions are for my thesis. But certain things don't actually need to be significant, like what you said. So I'm going to go back and reevaluate it and see whether it's a good thing. I guess, yeah. I think so, yeah.
Any other questions?
It would be interesting to then discern between acting style and school influences method acting, for example.
Yeah.
Question just asked, because the more one inhabits the role, the less one differentiates.
Yeah, one of the other sections that I did not talk about was this interview that we basically made up to basically measure like how method are you, or how much do you use method acting approaches in this particular character that you bought for the lab experiment. So we actually do measure it. I just didn't present it. And we also asked them like what schools they were training or what techniques they were training to. So yeah, there's a lot of that other data that will be in the thesis or paper, hopefully. But yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm next. My name is Indra Viscontis, and I'm going to tell you about a study that came together within 4 months as a response to an opportunity that couldn't be missed. My background is Lithuanian. I grew up in Canada, and throughout the first 10 years of my life, Lithuania, now I'm going to date myself, Lithuania was occupied by the Soviet Union, and it was up to those of us who were living outside of Lithuania to maintain the culture. But one thing that was happening inside Lithuania at that time, even though songs like the national anthem were banned, were prohibited, the flag was prohibited, there were times where the people would come together into these massive musical concerts, and they would defy the rules and spontaneously break into a song. Or I remember one time on our visit, we actually raised flags that we had sewn in the kitchen, and it was an act of resistance. So by some measures, this singing revolution, which swept across the Baltic states, was one of the key factors in bringing down the oppression of the Soviet Union. Last summer was the 100th anniversary of these choral festivals that now happen about every 4 years. And at the time, I was contacted by the leadership of this festival. They had just heard about the work that I was doing in the arts and health space, and they said, how can you demonstrate to the world the importance of this festival and the importance of our work? And I said, if 4 years ago you would come to me a lot more easily with pre-registration and so on, but what can we do in 4 months? And I'll tell you about what we did. But one of the things that I want to mention first is the why do we care? Why do we care that these kinds of events happen? What kinds of problems in our society can they solve? Is it just entertainment? And certainly in the US, we have an epidemic of loneliness. In fact, this is directly taken from the previous Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, who noted that social isolation is very damaging to our health. And in fact, that people who experience loneliness have measurable impacts in terms of their lifespan and health span. And more, we are spending time alone. That is what's happening in our culture, especially in the US. And this is not just a pandemic effect. We were seeing this curve well before the pandemic, and it has only gotten worse. So if we are becoming more socially isolated and it is affecting our health, we need data to demonstrate what are the ways in which we can combat this social isolation and bring ourselves together. So this is just a quick trailer video of the festival. You can see there are a lot of people involved, but the leadership of the festival was telling me that they had a problem, that anyone under the age of 30 living in Lithuania had never experienced occupation. So to them, these kinds of festivals were something their parents or their grandparents did, but they didn't see the relevance to themselves. And in order to participate in this kind of festival, it requires a fairly serious commitment. You have to start working on the music or the dancing for an entire year or more in advance. It requires marching for over a mile in hot, sweaty Lithuanian cultural attire. It requires standing in this massive amphitheater with 12,000 other singers, and so on and so on. So how could they encourage participation amongst young people? And one of the things that we decided to do is take a look at the experience of awe. In the lab, when it comes to getting the physiological markers of awe, people who study the impact of music generally look at the chills. Goosebumps, that feeling that we get over us like a wave, that tends to be one of the features of the experience of awe. And for some people, music is very effective at giving them the chills, and scientists who study the effect of music on us love this fact because the chills are easily measurable by any number of physiological measures. So we don't have to rely on self-report for people to tell us that they were moved by their music. We can literally just track heart rate or respiration rate, and we can see that they got the chills. In the lab, the findings so far have been that the chills don't happen to everyone. In fact, there's a number of studies that have shown that if you have the chills, your brain is different. You have a tighter connection between your auditory cortex and some of these other more sensory processing and motor areas of your brain. And so that's the story out there, that most of us actually don't get the chills. Anyone who has participated in one of these massive choral festivals thinks that either everybody at that festival is an exception to that rule, or there's something about the festival. So that was the first thing that I thought we could show, is we can demonstrate that actually the experience of awe and getting the chills is something that happens when we come together and participate in art making together, in self-expression, and that the chills are a much more common phenomenon. So we chose a piece of music that we thought has all the features of music that induces the chills. So there's sudden dynamic shifts, an unexpected harmonic change, the entry of new voices or instruments, especially if they enter at higher pitch ranges. That's important, remember that one. A melodic appoggiatura, which is essentially a momentary creation of dissonance that then resolves, and an expanded frequency range. This festival lasted a week, and the title of it was Khaleghian, which is the title of a song that was used as a proxy for the national anthem during Soviet occupation. So it has a lot of emotional meaning to people. And instead of it being a national anthem, it really talks about how the natural beauty of the country makes people proud to call it home. I'm going to play the actual piece for you from the festival in a minute. But what we did is before the festival, we had as many people as we could fill out a survey about their life satisfaction. We used the WHO 5-question, essentially quick look at how happy or healthy you are, and a number of measures that related to their experience of music. And then during the concert, this was the penultimate song after this 4-hour massive concert. And we tracked their responses using the situational awe scale about whether or not they got the chills. And I'll tell you, we got more than 1,000 responses. And we also had 70 heart rate monitors on performers and on audience members. So without further ado, here is the piece of music. I behoove you to look for examples of these features and see whether you agree that this is a piece that is likely to elicit the chills. Okay, so hopefully you caught a number of them. There's a huge entry of the male voices and then a big leap up into this higher range and this big climax. And then this whole thing repeats again. And it's in the second repetition that we are most likely to hear people get the chills. So during the concert, we had over 1,400 survey respondents, aged 11 to 89. The majority of them were female. As you can see, there are more singers who are female than male. And sure enough, we saw pretty strong evidence of situational awe, both in terms of viewers and participants, but we saw a bigger effect for the participants than the viewers. But the viewers also had a significantly greater experience of situational awe. We also found that there was a higher sense of connection for the participants versus the viewers. And 95% of our respondents reported getting the goosebumps. So the chills is not a phenomenon that is rare. It is rare in the lab. Certainly, we found that the vast majority of people that we surveyed reported feeling some chills, and that there was a very strong correlation between getting the chills and feeling a sense of connection. When we looked at the heart rate synchrony data, just to give you, orient you, 0 means no synchrony. And if there's no synchrony, we would expect all of these participants to be around here. Instead, according to my colleague who ran this part of the study, Ivana Konvalinka, who's quite famous for looking at interpersonal synchrony. And we needed somebody who could do this on the field within 4 months, especially with GDPR privacy rules. It's hard. She said that this is essentially off the charts, that this high rate of synchrony in these conditions was really pretty remarkable. And this is the song 35 is the one that I just mentioned. It has higher synchrony than the very last song, which is essentially an ending prayer. And then we looked a little bit more closely to the data and we saw this. So we had to go back to the video and say, what is that? What were they doing when that song came on? Because that is certainly unprecedented. And this is what they were doing. So they're swaying and they're moving and they're dancing, and this is a pop song, and this is something that is relevant to everyone because it is a pop song that's been around, in the last couple of decades and really powerful. So that was another lesson for us, that maybe the piece that gives you the chills is also not the piece necessarily that gives you the most synchrony. And with heart rate synchrony, we know that there is a very tight connection between heart rate synchronization and feelings of social connection. In our post survey, we had 2,000 people complete the same survey as we did before the concert. Again, we had a good age range. Again, we had a predominantly female sample. And here we were also looking at impacts on collective self-esteem. And I will say that it didn't really matter, actually, if you were participating in the concert, unless you were a dancer. I don't know what's going on with the dancers. There was this strong sense of collective self-esteem in both viewers and participants. And the last thing that I will just mention is that we see this greater collective self-esteem in people who are choral singers compared to people who are not. And that makes sense if you look at the questions of collective self-esteem, which essentially involve things like, do you feel like you are a member of a group? Do you feel like your identity is tied to that of others, and so on? So I'm about to go back to Lithuania next week and present this to the leadership of the festival and try to give them the ammunition now to go back and tell the young people that there is a reason to put in all the work to participate in these kinds of festivals, because it makes you feel more connected and it helps us fight against the loneliness epidemic that has the potential to destroy not only our own health, but also our society. Thank you. So we might have time for one question. Yeah, David. Yes, so the Singing Revolution is exactly about these events. And yeah, exactly right. There's a great documentary film called The Singing